This is Steve Addison for the Movements Podcast, the podcast for people who want to multiply disciples and churches everywhere. Today we're talking to James in Beirut about slaying giants in the Middle East.
We took a little break and spent some time in the States for a couple of months, and then from the beginning of October, we hit the ground running. Right before we made it back, we got a contact. There was some other missionary colleagues who had reached out about a woman that they were seeking somebody here in this country that could initiate follow-up for her. She was going to be here for a month. She was coming to attend her brother's wedding. I forwarded that contact to two of our key leaders, Pablo and Messin. I said, hey, there's this woman, she wants follow-up. Her house is a solid 3 hours away from where you're at. And these two leaders, one is in his late 50s, the other one's in his late 60s, but they have terrible health problems and their bodies are just constantly falling apart. And so they got into this little car and drove the 3 hours on terrible bumpy roads.
I've been in that car and I've been on those roads.
And so 24 hours after I forwarded this number, I get a picture back. And here they are all having dinner in this lady's village. And the guys are just telling me about, man, this woman's incredible. And she's got some background in the Bible, but it seems like this is the first time she's ever really understood things. She's only ever heard it in the language of the country that she lives in. And she's never actually heard it in her mother tongue. She's married to a guy who's from a country just north of here. And they have a totally different language that has no relationship to the Arabic that we speak here. And she had only ever heard the things about Jesus in that trade language before. And then now, for the first time, she's sitting down with another Muslim background believer, and she's hearing the details of the gospel and Jesus' sacrifice and everything. She's hearing it in her mother tongue from a guy who has a very similar background to herself. And she's saying, wow, I've been looking for this for 3 years. I've been trying to find somebody who could help me understand these things like this. So she moved several years ago. She married a guy from there. I think it was 2020 that she moved. And then a couple years after being there was a big earthquake. And that was her first exposure to the gospel. There was some other workers who had come into her area and were helping people and offering prayer. And those workers started a Bible study with her in her home. And so she had been hearing the things about Jesus and hearing the stories from the Word for several years. And all credit and respect and honor to those workers who pioneered originally with her in her home. Somebody's been sowing for 3 years, and then God has orchestrated the circumstances in order for this other guy, these other Arabs, to get in the mix. And not just any Muslim background believers, but those who have a movement DNA. 4 days later, my wife and I are back in country, and we already have our first day back, and we've got to go to sleep. And then the next day, we got to drive a couple hours so that we could go have lunch with this woman, her brother's fiance, and with our two guys. And in those 4 days, Messin had been on the phone with this woman every single day for hours, discipling her, training her, walking her through all the basics. And I'll just describe what happened. We went, at this point, it's been 5 days that they've actually known each other, Messin and this woman. This woman who I will refer to as Jenny, okay? There we go. Now she's got a name, Jenny. So Jenny and Messin have been on the phone for 5 days now after their original face-to-face meeting. And my wife and I make it back home, and they all want to have lunch together. So we meet her for the first time face-to-face. And Messin is just so excited. And so he's queuing things up for Jenny. He says, Jenny, explain to James the 3 circles. And so she just goes through and explains all 3 circles. And he says, Jenny, tell James about this IKEA story. Tell James about the Trinity. What do we say about the Trinity? Do we worship 3 gods or do we worship 1 God? Tell James about, and he just keeps queuing her up with one thing after another. And he's getting so excited because Jenny just has internalized all of this discipleship. She's really, and it's clear that, I don't know, that what I saw is Messin had, over 5 days, given her one of the most intensive follow-ups that I've ever seen. He actually went and photocopied all of his notes from field 1, field 2, field 3, field 4, all of his notes from how to enter, how to share the gospel, how to make a disciple, all the commands of Christ, the healthy church. He photocopied all those notes and he bound it together in a binder. And he had made a booklet with all of his little annotations in there of, this is a little way that you can use to explain the Trinity to Muslim background people. And these are some things that you might hear along the way. I looked at it. To me, it looked like he had recreated T for T or something, but in his mother tongue. And he photocopied the whole thing, bound it together, and handed it to Jenny as a gift. He had gone to the gas station and bought a gift card at the gas station that had $50 on it. And he had bought a SIM card because Jenny wasn't able to continue all the time with follow-up because she was dependent on Wi-Fi. And so Messin, out of his own pocket and out of the churches that they've got there, they did a collection where they took up a collection, got a gift card from the gas station and got a SIM card for Jenny so that she could get to her oikos and make several visits among all of her oikos, and so that she could have 24/7 around-the-clock data so that they could be in constant communication, so that he could give her coaching, give her follow-up, and so that they could process through the experiences that she's having as she's 3-4 hours away making disciples in an area in this country where there's never been any churches. Never been any churches. This is a totally new people group. It's a totally new area. They're actually they come from the Alawite people, which is a massive, it's a minority people group across the Middle East people. There's little to no action happening among those people. They're an offshoot of Shia Islam, but they believe that it's hard to actually track down what they truly believe. But when you talk to Alawites and when they let their hair down and be honest with you, they really believe that Imam Ali, the fourth caliph, that he was an incarnation of God. He was God incarnate on earth. So they treat him like God. That's why they're called Alawites. It comes from the name Ali. So they're devotees of Ali. Jenny was here in country for 27 days total. She's got some background knowledge of the word through a second language, not her mother tongue. But in coming here and meeting other Muslim background believers who have movement DNA and getting this intensive follow-up and training, within those 27 days, as she was returning to the country she lives in, returning to her husband, she was leaving behind around 15 new believers, and 3 homes that had opened up their houses to host church with their oikos. While we were still here, we went with Pablo and Messin to the area that Jenny's family is from. We attended her brother's wedding, that turned out to be a really big deal. We got the invite to the wedding. For a minute there, everybody in the family was very mad that Jenny had converted to Christianity and that her brother also had converted to Christianity and that they'd been baptized. And there's some harsh pushback and some persecution. And her brother began to exhibit, he looked afraid, and he started to say things to his father-in-law, saying, "No, it's not real. I didn't really get baptized." And so we followed up with more discipleship. We did our Do Not Fear lesson. Actually, Messin facilitated the Do Not Fear lesson on the phone with Jenny, and then Jenny taught the Do Not Fear lesson to her brother Zach. And so Zach, he heard the Do Not Fear lesson, realized that it was sin for him to deny what had truly happened, and made a decision before his wedding where he went back to his father-in-law and said, "No, what you heard is true. I really did get baptized. It's my choice. I'm going to follow Jesus. If you don't like it, I don't have to marry your daughter." And wow. and the father-in-law was shocked and said, "You're no longer allowed to share in any of our Alawite religious traditions, but okay, I guess we can go ahead with the marriage."
Everything was on the line for the brother, for Zach.
Yeah. And we, as foreigners, were really clueless about whether or not we should attend this wedding. Do we cause more harm? Are we a liability? Or do we go? Do we not go? And then I had a dream. And in the dream, I'm hanging out with Zach's father-in-law. and explaining to him the truth of the gospel and reading the Bible together. And he's like fighting with me in the dream and contradicting the things that I'm saying. And then in my dream, I just jumped over and I gave him a big hug. And then he just hugged me right back. And it was clear that what he needed was love in the dream. So I woke up next day, I told the guys about the dream, and we all decided, okay, we need to go to this wedding. So we went to the wedding. My wife and I got out there on the dance floor and we cut a rug with all the Arabs. And then for days after that, just Jenny's family and Zach's family and his in-laws are all calling them saying, who are those people? They're just like us. They dance like us. They wore the right things to the wedding. They dressed the right way. The way that they acted, it was so sweet. And it just goes to show sometimes the most strategic thing is to go cut a rug on the dance floor. We met at the wedding. We met one of Zach's colleagues who he works with. And Zach had already been sharing about Jesus with this guy. Mm. And so a couple days after the wedding, we went to this guy's house. We'll call him Andy. And so we go to Andy's house, and Andy and his wife are there, and they live in a neighborhood that we don't belong in. I'm pretty sure it's the first time any foreigners have ever been in his house. And he's from the majority, not majority, but he's from the Sunni Muslim background people group. And so if you're tracking, at this point, we're all sitting together in Andy's house. We've got Pablo and Messin, who are Shiite Muslim background believers, who are discipling and training Jenny and Zach, who are Alawite background believers. And we're all watching Jenny and Zach facilitate baptism for Andy and his wife, who are Sunni Muslim background believers. So we've got 4 or 5 different, and then my wife and I are like original Christians, quote unquote, and we're watching it all go down. It's completely covered all we're missing is a couple Catholics. And then we'll have every people group in Lebanon represented in that one lunch. Wow. And the Druze. And just an incredible day watching them get baptized and watching Jenny and Zach really internalize the same movement DNA, the same intensity of follow-up, the same 48-hour rule of when you get a new believer, you drop everything for at least the next 48 hours and commit your life, your schedule fully to that person. Just watching Messin in particular, observing the intensity of follow-up and the number of times that we went through the model assist watch leave process in those 27 days. I mean, we mauled for Jenny, model assist watch leave. We mauled for Zach, model assist watch leave. We watched Jenny maul for Zach. We watched Jenny watch Zach maul for Andy.
Wow. Yeah.
I mean, it was just cascading maul. And it was happening in the context of this intense 48-hour follow-up philosophy of when you get new believers, you drop everything. It doesn't matter how far away they are. You get in the car, even if your back hurts. You drive 4 hours one way, through the rain, through the potholes, go into the house that you don't belong in. Like these guys are key guys, Pablo and Messin. They expressed to me several times, they said, never in my life did I ever imagine that I would step foot into that part of this country.
Ah, okay.
They said, we are terrified of those people. We don't like those people and they don't like us.
We have a history of civil war with one another.
And Messin just keeps telling me, he said, if you had asked me a month ago, would I ever set foot in that neighborhood? I would say, absolutely not. And so all of us are just living in this kairos moment, this God moment, where it's just unreasonable, the level to which God is pulling the strings. It's clear that this is something that God is doing. That's personally what I felt at that lunch where we were watching Shia disciple and train and mentor the Alawites so that they could baptize the Sunnis. I just said to myself, I'm like, okay, we're officially in the only God can do this category. We're in that territory now. This cannot be manufactured by man. We're officially into the only God is capable of something like this. In 27 days, this woman gets trained, gets baptizes her brother, leaves behind a solid 15 people that are ready to follow Jesus and 3 different homes that are opening up their doors. And that's continued to multiply.
Jenny with Messin's support and backup, but it's Jenny who will be training these
Yeah.
new disciples.
And so she's on the phone now every day with her family, with her oikos, with her leaders that she trained here in those 27 days to follow up with them. And we're on the phone with her saying, look, this is your family. This is your relationships. We're not the CEO of anything going on in this country. We're not the boss. This is your influence, and we're here to serve you. If you want us to get in the car and go see your brother, we'll get in the car and go see your brother. And I feel like that in particular has been such a big, for her, she feels she's got a rough background, very rough life. She was young when she got married off to this guy who was a real jerk, and they split, and then she's had a real rough life. And now God has picked her and chosen her and given her this calling and this importance. And we finished basically all the basic discipleship curriculum that we do with new believers here during those 27 days. And we started getting into some of Paul's journeys and some of the more leadership-oriented things, apostolic leadership-oriented things that we like to do with leaders that we train. And so we started talking about Paul's first journey. And she's just totally wrecked by seeing Paul's first journey, because she's been in some of those places where Paul's going through in his first journey, and realizes this is where Christianity started and now it's dead, and we've got to bring it back to life.
Yeah.
And God's using me to do that. That's what's going on in her head, is God has chosen me. And she's now training her husband. And we've been on the phone with him, and he's just an incredibly humble guy to learn from his wife. So that's been a major breakthrough, just watching that whole thing, watching how Messon had built his own. I think for me as an outsider, I'm always given tools, I'm always given training, I'm always trying to help my guys create their own critical path that gets from entry all the way to church formation and leadership development. And I always tell the guys, like, I'm giving you tools, and sometimes it might taste a little bit like a cheeseburger because I'm not from here. I'm a foreigner. But you guys you're chefs, and you work in the kitchen, and it's your job to take the ingredients that I give you, and then you make it taste like your food. You make it taste like tabbouleh. You make it taste like sfiha. And that's what I saw. I watched how Messon had compiled all of his notes, built his own training to get from zero all the way through to leadership development. And he had made that notebook and given it as a gift to Jenny. And for me, I was like, finally, now I really get to see what Messon really thinks are the most critical elements, the most important lessons for people to learn to get from zero all the way to leadership development. And I'm taking notes. I'm flipping through his notebook. I asked for one. I said, I need you to get us one. And so he made another one for my wife, for Hope, and he put Hope's name on it. He says, this is a gift from the disciples of the Messiah to Hope. And so I've been studying his training manual, and I'm learning from his training manual about how the mind of this people group works. And he's learning as he's venturing outside of his own comfort zone, crossing geographic boundaries, crossing cultural boundaries, crossing out of his own people group. And so that's just been an incredible learning experience. I do want to talk about what I feel like are some of the elements that allowed them to have the freedom to pursue with such intensity. And that does have some relationship to the time that we spent stateside during those 3.5 months. Because leading up to that stateside time, we had been studying extensively the appointment of elders and seeing how can we implement that within our own network. And so we did, by about March, I think it was, we had broken down their state into about 4 subregions where we were able to identify really clear clusters of multiplication where there was at least 3rd or 4th generation church growth, at least 70 to 100 believers within that cluster. And then as we were able to identify those clusters of believers and clusters of churches in separate regions through our gen maps and our tracking, what we did was we printed off all of the gen maps, and we organized all of the gen maps into three separate categories, like most viable for the appointment of elders, on the way but not quite yet ready to focus on appointing elders, and then the newest work that was the least developed, the least mature, and the least ready for us to come back through and attempt to appoint elders. And my goal with the guys was to just get one shining example of a healthy network of churches that are tied together by a plurality of elders over that little cluster of house churches. And so by March, we had all that studied and we started implementing. So we used 1 Timothy 3 and Titus 1:9, or 1:5, excuse me, and went through the qualifications of elders. And we had, and it's really interesting in the Arabic, how the Arabic word, and I've heard arguments for this in the Greek before about the appointment of elders, that the Arabic that it uses is this intikhabet, which is to elect. Like it's the same word they have for local elections, meaning basically that the people responsible for picking out the elders is not the outside apostolic catalysts, but the people responsible for nominating those elders are the local churches. And so that's the model and the pattern that we base this whole process off of, where we put it back to these clusters of churches. Nominate from among yourselves those who actually reflect the character qualities that we see in 1 Timothy 3 and in Titus 1. Nominate people who are actually proven fruitful disciple makers, who actually have some experience in doing this stuff, and who actually have the character qualifications. And so they nominated people, and then we, as the apostolic band, if you will, affirmed those appointments for a plurality of elders in each one of these 4 subregions. And what that did, though, is it alleviated so much of the pressure off of our key leaders. And it reinforced a DNA and an attitude of entrusting authority downstream. And I think ultimately it's just led to our most key apostolic catalyst guys have a lot more capacity and freedom in their brain and in their heart to pursue new leads, because they know that these brothers and sisters that they have already suffered greatly for getting them the gospel and discipling them, that they're being cared for, that they're being cared for by people who genuinely care about them and who have the right character qualifications to be trustworthy examples to the flock. And so we did the whole appointment of elders process while we were stateside. Well, my wife and I were in the States for 3.5 months. And so we did a whole lot of that on Zoom, where we're discussing and studying these things on the phone, and then they're going and practically implementing all of this. And at the same time, so we had 2 structures that we tried to put in place for the sake of the movement to be able to continue to grow and to expand in depth and in width. At the same time, we put forward the concept of appointing from among themselves new members that they could add on to this apostolic band, the nucleus of this apostolic band that Pablo and Messin have been. And they chose 3 guys from among the whole network that they felt like had been tested, that they had been proven, that they're faithful, and that they've got the fruit to back it up, that they genuinely are multipliers. And our goal in all of that has been to expand the top circle of leaders, the number of people at the top overseeing this wide movement. How can we expand that people into a larger circle for mutual accountability and to help carry the burden together? And so, for example, the whole time while this stuff is going on with Jenny and with Zach and Andy, there's 3 guys who are part of this newly formed apostolic band that are traveling back and forth to all the different districts throughout their state. And after we had finished this 27-day whirlwind of training Jenny and starting this new work in her region, we came back and we had our evaluation meetings with the apostolic band, where we sat down and listened to their reports that they had over the past month. And we listened to them tell stories about, we baptized this new guy, and then he took us with him, and we went down to his oikos, and then he showed us these guys, and we started this many new churches. So while we're living it over here in this new area, we've appointed our disciples in our stead over in this other state to keep up the work of traveling around their state. Because at this point, the area that these guys live in, Pablo Mesa, their state is about 400,000 people, and the vast majority of that is Muslim. And we're currently tracking over 1,000 believers, over 1,000 baptized believers. And praise God, over 1,000 baptized believers. But what does that mean for the other 399,000? That reaching, I can pat myself on the back and say, we finally reached the referee definition of a movement. We've got multiple streams of fourth generation, 1,000 baptisms, blah, blah, blah. But I don't want to do that when there's 399,000 people that are dying and going to hell.
Yeah.
And so for us, even with the guys, we consider it to be like the end of the beginning. It's like now that we've reached that level of multiplication of fruit, it's more like the sound of the starter pistol. Okay, now we can get started. It has no relationship to any sort of end or exit. I feel like right now for us, it's like we're just getting started, but we're witnessing like the inertia of this movement it's like the first couple of rotations of the flywheel, where now it just takes a little less effort for each go around.
I don't think you're just getting started. I think you've just climbed the first major peak on the way to Mount Everest. What it took to get to that first peak will put you in good stead for the rest.
Most of my experience in the States with trying to start apostolic bands is more like, all right, we got some well-meaning, well-intentioned Christians who have some fruit and making disciples. But this is the first go-around for me of seeing it go from absolute lostness to true, like Pauline style ministry.
So what's the time frame between Pablo coming to the Lord and today?
4 years. From patient 0 to 1,000 disciples and an apostolic band and elders, it's 4 years.
So now you're standing on top with these brothers and sisters of the first peak.
Yeah.
And you look back down. What has God taught you? What's he written on your heart from this first major milestone?
I feel like for me, it's just what God's taught me is I really need to change my expectations. I feel like it's just an experiential knowledge of the book of Acts is what it feels like. I just went back and re-listened to Steve Smith talking about precedent and promise back from this SC training in 2016 in Houston. And he talked about everybody would call and they would write in and they would ask me for a case study. And they would say, don't give me a case study from India. I know what happens there. Give me a case study on postmodern Arabs living in Malaysia. Don't give me a Bangladeshi Muslim case study. Give me a real Muslim case study. Those are fake Muslims. We need real Muslim case studies. And he just talked about the precedent of like that attitude it's like there's a race going on around the world of don't tell me about India. I know what happens there. Don't tell me about China. I know what happens there. And I feel like we're getting to the don't tell me about Lebanon. I know what happens there.
So changing your expectations is believing God for more, not waiting for someone else to have the precedent, but to be part of the precedent yourself.
Correct. Yeah. When you don't have precedent, all you have is promise. All you have is promise. And all you have is, he compared it back to David and Goliath. And that part in 2 Samuel when it says a bunch of the names of David's mighty men killed a bunch of giants. They killed this giant and they killed this giant who was a descendant from Goliath, and they killed this giant, and even David's nephew kills a giant. And Steve's question was always like, where did these guys learn how to kill giants? And you got to go back to the first dead giant. You got to go back to Goliath and David and the whole army of Israel out there shaking in their boots because of this giant. And then David says, who does this uncircumcised Philistine think that he is to taunt the armies of the living God? When David was an idiot, but all he had was the promise of God. There was no precedent, but he had the promise. And he just, he killed Goliath, and then he chopped his head off, and then he took his head to the city of Jerusalem to say, you guys are next. And I feel like we've been living in I feel like the Arab world has been living in promise and not precedent for decades, since Islam, since about the year 600. I feel like we've been living in promise and not precedent. But now, I'm not saying Goliath is dead. I'm just saying he's on life support and he's hooked up to a ventilator, and it doesn't look good.
Well, what an amazing update from the Middle East. And if you know anyone who would benefit from the Movements podcast, it would be a great help to them and to us to let them know. This is Steve Addison for the Movements podcast.